Now it looks like Mao Zedong, he has some daddy issues. Mao Zedong has got some daddy issues. Now it kind of makes sense. Why would a person be a communist if you got the authoritarian father, and then with Mao Zedong, he looks at the rest of the family and says, "Hell, we could just run this farm by ourselves. We don't need to have one person bossing us around. Hey, we can do it, and we can do it all together in solidarity." I.e., communism. We're communist. So maybe you have to have daddy issues in order to become a communist. What's goddamn Stalin's story? Trotsky, they don't look like they had good fathers. Did they even have fathers? Lenin's father? Where were these guys' fathers at? Did they even have... That's why you should make sure the father's in the family, or they'll turn into communist revolutionaries. Do you want your kid to turn into a communist revolutionary? Oh, you do? Okay, well then make sure there's no father. Well, make sure there is a father, but make sure he is just authoritarian and brutal and unempathetic and just doesn't give a damn and takes things way too far. There. Now you'll have yourselves all the communist revolutionaries. Hunan province is smaller than the state of Nebraska. He was born in the Hunan province, but it's larger than the state of Washington. What? Smaller than the state of Nebraska, but larger than the state of... Is Nebraska that big? I thought Washington's bigger than Nebraska, but apparently not. Persons born in Hunan are practically a race apart from the other Chinese. Historically, Hunanese are considered vigorous and fearless, have gained notoriety both as heroes and brigands. China can be conquered only when all the people of Hunan are dead, is an ancient saying. Mao's birthplace, with its straw-thatched roof and walled-in courtyard, was simply constructed and sparsely furnished. He remembered it later as being comfortable and kept scrupulously clean by his hard-working mother. From the beams hung hot red peppers, a source of seasoning for the otherwise bland diet of steamed rice. In front of his home, a lake added beauty to the surroundings as it mirrored the trees and shrubs until some villager made ripples by washing his clothes or himself in the water. Inasmuch as the family name appears first in most Oriental cultures, Mao Zedong's father was called Mao Jianxing. His mother, keeping her maiden name, as was custom, was called Wen Chi Mi. They were peasants, but considered rather high peasants in that category. Mao Jianxing had served several years in the army, during which he had saved enough money to purchase himself a 2-acre farm. This amount of land produced more rice than was needed to feed the Mao family. The father began selling his excess rice, soon accumulating enough capital to purchase rice grown by other peasants and selling it in the city for a profit. Meager as this business was, it gave the Maos a stature in the neighborhood above that of the ordinary peasants who had suffered from hunger most of their lives. Many of the peasants were illiterate, but because they produced food as a class, they rated second only to the scholars in China's social structure in the last century. Most of the public officials came from the scholar class, the honorable clerks entrusted with perpetuating the nation's ancient heritage. Third in line were the artisans, who processed what the farmers grew in their fields. The merchants, because they produced nothing but took a profit from another's labor, were fourth on the social scale. Soldiers, because they killed and plundered, were considered more lowly than merchants. Last and considered lowest of all were the mean people, or the Qian men. The Qian men, this group exceedingly minor in size, consisted of domestic servants, entertainers, barbers, and prostitutes. Considering the advantages of locale and his family's financial stability, Mao's childhood would probably have been relatively pleasant, except for one thing: he hated his father, and the father returned the son's animosity. The elder Mao's sharp facial features were matched by his tongue. His boiling point was frighteningly low, and he was known to berate all about him. He often demeaned his gentle, long-suffering wife. He made certain that his farm laborers were constantly kept aware of his contempt for them. No one under his domination escaped his outburst of rage, especially not his firstborn, who felt himself to be the prime target. The Mao family also had 3 younger children, 2 boys, Tsay Tan and Tsay Min, and a girl, Tsay Hung. Once a month, so there was 4. He had 3 siblings, so 4 kids, mother, father, 4 kids. Once a month, the miserly Mao begrudgingly provided those in his employ with eggs to go with their rice, but he never gave eggs to his own son. As a very young child, Mao Zedong was physically frail. Some biographers think that this is why the father disliked him. However, the boy grew rapidly, and by the time he was 10, he was healthy and strong. Nevertheless, his father's abuses, both verbal and physical, had continued. He accused his son of laziness. Although at the age of 8, the boy was working in the fields. When he was even younger, Mao Zedong sat on a wicker platform for hours pretending to be a scarecrow to frighten off the hungry birds. The boy grew to detest his enforced labor in the rice paddies, especially after he started to school and he discovered printed words. He became an avid reader and resented the tedious, time-consuming chores that took him from books. The books loaned to him by a local school teacher had to be sneaked into the house and hidden to be taken out and read only when his father slept or was away. If Mao's father was his enemy, his mother was his ally. An ineffectual one, however, because of the then inferior standing of wife and woman. Despite the daily turmoils her husband generated, she was able to remain placid. Her round, broad face, which her son inherited, reflected patience, kindness, and compassion. She was a devout Buddhist and tried to impress on Mao the evil of killing any living thing, as well as the necessity of making rice offerings to the hungry. She herself was rarely able to give away food, as her husband carefully guarded the family rice supply. Mao's mother did manage, however, to teach her son religious hymns and took him to nearby temples, praying that he would become a Buddhist priest. An illiterate, she may not have understood his passion for learning, but she hoped it would lead one day to his standing in saffron-colored robes before a Buddhist shrine offering rice to the poor. Mao's teachers at primary school were mostly stern, adhering strictly to the traditional and antiquated methods of teaching and educating. Meant then, as it had for centuries before, having pupils memorize the long, complicated, and rarely understood Analects and the 4 classics. The Analects, compiled after Confucius's death by his disciples, supposedly contained the interpretation of the scholar's philosophy. The 4 classics included the Book of Odes, a ponderous collection of moralistic poetry, the Book of History, documents dating back to the Zhou Dynasty, 1122 to 249 BC, the Book of Change, dissertations on the supernatural and the philosophy of yin and yang, those 2 opposite but complementary elements that the Chinese believed made the world go round. Yang, positive and bright, was considered the masculine factor. Yin, negative and dark, the feminine factor. Their interrelation, it was thought, determined the destiny of persons, events, and things. And the Book of Rights, behavior codes delving into motives, attitudes, and the development of the existing good in man so that it became contagious and was contracted by others. Interesting. So that's the education of the Chinese people, the Analects and the 4 classics. Book of Odes, Book of History, Book of Change, and the Book of Rights. Mao was interested in learning, but he disliked the classics. What he really wanted to read were old Chinese tales of romance and adventure, especially those dealing with flagrant rebellion. This type of book was outlawed as evil by the schools, but he was sometimes able to spend school hours reading the banned books by hiding them between the covers of the weighty classics. What struck him most about the old Chinese heroes was that not one of them was a peasant. Mao decided at this time of his life that he did not like being a peasant. A weapon that both Mao and his father used to fight one another was Confucianism. Confucianism, the doctrine of the sage and the teacher, who for some 2,000 years had such a profound effect on China and the Chinese. Born around 551 BC in what is now Shantung province, Confucius lived until about 479 BC. He had been considered by many scholars as the greatest of all Chinese. Although little is known for certain about the man or his teachings, it is said that Confucius, great scholar that he was, considered himself an ordinary man. Also, he did not expect the impossible from others. He did, however, believe in a system of order and authority, a well-defined pattern for living with a specific place for everyone. How, he asked, can an individual know what is expected of him if he does not know where he belongs in the overall design? This, he felt, applied not only to a nation's governing body, but to the family as well. As humane as Confucius is depicted, he would not fit into the category of a present-day champion of human rights. It was the relationship of individuals to other individuals that he considered important, not the individual per se. If a person upset the proper patterns of behavior, Confucius felt little concern for the inhumane treatment that might befall him, such as branding or foot amputation, common punishments at the time. Many people believe that with the passing of time, the interpretation of the wise man's teaching became more rigid than he had intended. Confucianism, many feel, became the official state doctrine because it was a way of keeping people in line. And this rigidity moved from a state level to a family level, where allegiance to the changeless past and to those who lived then was so strong that it would not be ended even by death. The breakdown of the family was that the older generation was superior to the younger, the man superior to the woman. This was the part of Confucius's philosophy that the older Mao and millions of other Chinese grasped and held on to tightly. Mao's father demanded respect and obedience from his family and from those he employed. It was in the area of interpretation that the son, smarter and better schooled, his father had only 2 years of formal education, defeated his father with the older man's own weapon. When the father insisted on complete obedience from his eldest son because Confucius had said so, the son reminded him that Confucius also had said that obedience and filial piety were not to be offered automatically. They should be given only if the parent fulfilled his responsibility of love, concern, and protection for the child. When his father abused him for being lazy, Mao Zedong claimed that Confucius had said that the young could not be expected to work as those who were older. And you have to love and be concerned for me and protect me. You didn't love and have concern or protect, you can't get my obedience. How are you going to expect my obedience when you're a pile of shit who doesn't love, have concern, protect others? Or the young can't be expected to work as those who are. In later life, Mao Zedong voiced disdain for Confucianism, and he was not alone in this. Many modern thinkers feel that these ethical precepts for the manipulation and control of a whole society paralyzed Chinese life. China stagnated and became weak. Confucianism had caused a nation of people to look inward and back instead of outward and forward, by suggesting that what was good enough for honorable ancestors would forever be good enough for their descendants. However, young Mao did not take seriously the traditional role of the eldest son with his 2 brothers and 1 sister. He enjoyed teaching them, and he also organized them along with his mother as a unit of defense against the father. When Mao Zedong was 13, his father decided that his son had had enough education. He had learned to use an abacus and was expected to keep the business accounts as well as spending all daylight hours working in the fields. Mao did so for about a year and then ran away to live and study for a few months with an unemployed school teacher in the village. When he returned home, his father told him that plans had been made for Mao to become a rice broker. About this time, Mao Zedong heard from his mother's cousin of a middle school in Hsiang, some 15 miles from his home. The school placed less emphasis on the classics and leaned somewhat toward radical, more practical methods of teaching. Mao knew he must find a way to attend middle school, but his father was adamantly opposed. It was a matter of economics. Not only would he lose his son's services on the farm, but he had to pay the wages to a farmhand to replace him. Once more, Mao Zedong turned to Confucius for help, reminding his father that the old master was himself a scholar. He promised his father he would study hard so one day he would be able to pass the civil examinations and enter into the service of the imperial government. Since scholars were regarded highest in the social structure, any adulation that Mao Zedong might earn would be reflected on Mao Jinxing. Finally, the elder Mao relented. Young Mao was between 14 and 16 at the time. The reason for the uncertainty may have something to do with the Chinese way of determining age. A child is considered 1 year old at birth, and that the Chinese New Year, which falls between the middle of January and the end of February, everyone automatically becomes a year older. Mao was married by the time he left home for school. His parents had made all the arrangements, and his bride was some 4 years older than he. It can be assumed that Mao's father made certain that his daughter-in-law had a strong body and could do her share of work in the fields. In later years, Mao explained that since his first marriage was never consummated, he chose not to accept its existence. In the fall of the year, Mao gathered together some well-thumbed books and a few pieces of threadbare clothing, making 2 equal bundles. He tied them to the end of a carrion pole, then hoisting the pole onto his shoulders, he turned his back on the village of his birth and took his first important step into history. Chapter 3, China's Sorrows. Tradition can stifle what is new. The old can overthrow what is new. When this happens, man will lose his ability to adapt himself to a new age, and this organic body, China, in history, will perish. Mao Zedong.